Please note this episode discusses mature themes. While not explicit, listener discretion is advised. Laura Donovan is a writer based in Portland, Oregon, where she lives with her husband and 2 young sons. Before stepping into motherhood, Laura spent a year and a half immersed in the world of true crime as part of the team behind Crime Watch Daily with Chris Hansen, where she managed social media and helped generate nationwide buzz for some of the show's most gripping investigations. It was there that she developed a deep respect for storytelling that seeks justice and a fascination with the psychology behind criminal behavior. With a background in digital journalism, Laura previously helped shape the voices of Attention, Hello Giggles, and Mike. Her essays have appeared in Romper, Bustle, She Knows, Business Insider, and more. She's currently working on a memoir that delves into her late-in-life autism diagnosis, discovered only after both of her children were diagnosed, and how it reframed everything she thought she knew about identity, motherhood, and the way she moves through the world. Like a grown-up Harriet the Spy, albeit with a softer edge, Laura believes her neurodivergence is her superpower. She sees a unique and necessary place for autistic thinkers in the true crime space, where attention to detail, pattern recognition, and deep curiosity can eliminate the darker corners others miss. This is True Crime in Hollywood, Laura's personal tale. Hi, listeners. I'm sitting down with Laura Donovan. And, usually I open up an episode telling you like a really positive story about how somebody got into my life. And while there is a lot of positive with how, our friendship has evolved in terms with Laura. But the reality is I actually heard from Laura not too long after the Rolling Stone article concerning Billy Jensen came out. And the reason she reached out was because she actually worked on Crime Watch Daily with Billy back in the day. So while I don't want to necessarily have that be your introduction, Laura is somebody that is beyond inspirational, and I cannot wait for you to all understand who this wonderful, lovely woman is. So first and foremost, welcome to True Crime in Hollywood, Laura.
Thank you. So good to be here.
Yes, thank you for doing this. So right out of the gate, Laura, I just want to talk about like your early childhood and what life was like and what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yes, so very similar to you. I was born in Los Angeles, California. I consider that to be my home forever, even
Yeah.
though, yeah, I love LA and, these fires just, they still break my heart thinking
Yes.
about it. Um,
Yes.
but yes, I grew up in Los Angeles. I'm here in Portland now because my husband is from Portland, and that's where we wanted our children to grow up. But I grew up in Los Angeles. I was born in the 80s
Mm-hmm.
and I grew up in the 90s there. And I was pretty much anxious from the moment I can remember. I've always kind of been wired in a way to think about the world and what's going on. And I guess I would say I have a hyper awareness of what's around me. And so when I was little, I was kind of like this moth to a flame individual. I loved scary stories, even though they'd keep me up at night. And I remember being a kid in the 90s watching unsolved mysteries when I was not supposed to be doing that. And then I wouldn't be able to sleep. And my parents would say, Laura, don't watch that stuff. We told you you couldn't watch that. You couldn't watch Afraid of the Dark. And I still would. And yeah, I was always curious about how do these stories end,
Oh,
especially, unsolved mysteries.
yeah.
Those stories have no conclusion and we're still figuring it out.
Mm-hmm. 100%. So did that then kind of tailor to what you're doing today, or how did that all kind of like manifest?
So I've always been extra curious about people and the world. And as you know, and as readers will soon find out, I am writing a memoir right now about discovering my neurodivergence and my autism at age 35. And that is following the autism diagnoses of both of my sons. And so Celine, I know you are neurodivergent,
Mm-hmm.
and I know you have a sibling on the spectrum, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so one thing that a lot of women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and their 20s as well are learning is that neurodivergence has gone unseen and underdiagnosed in women for decades because
Mhm.
boys kind of set the tone for how we view presentation. And
Mhm.
so when I was little, they just thought, oh, Laura's weird, Laura's neurotic, Laura's obsessive. But
Mhm.
all of those were signs of autism. And so this brings me to your question, how did I get into true crime? Well, I've always had this obsessive nature about myself. I'm obsessed with people, I'm obsessed with stories. I remember everything people tell me about themselves.
Mhm.
And that really kind of segued into true crime for me. I mean, I worked at Crime Watch Daily with Chris Hansen from 2017 to 2018 before my first son was born. And so I was doing web production. I
Mhm.
wasn't I wasn't like a producer or someone you'd see on TV
Yeah.
interviewing the survivors or stories about the victims. I was writing about I was writing about it on social media and I was doing the social media posts. But I've always been curious about people. And I think there's so much now that's available to us for online research.
Mhm.
And that's why you see a lot of these online sleuthing. A lot of
Yeah.
that's happening now. And there are cases, as you know of, that have been solved by like the
Mhm.
Reddit investigators.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I just really love I really love what like the internet has done for online sleuthing and whatnot. So
Yeah, I totally get it. And I want to go back a little bit because I think it's important to kind of talk about the culture that we lived in the 80s and 90s because
yes.
as people know, in my personal tales in all three now, I have talked about certain cases that stuck with me as a child, teenager to today. And I think there was something going on because I was born in 1987 and by the time I was like cognizant of conversations, that my parents were having, like I heard the name Adam Walsh all the time, growing up. And then America's Most Wanted, then, became a show. And then I was aware of who John Walsh was. And then it was like JonBenet Ramsey, who was very close to my age, where I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. You're telling me parents kill their kids? Like that's how I interpreted it. And and so that kind of like spiraled. And then growing up in the world of like OJ Simpson, the Menendez brothers, like all of these cases were treated as if that was like the next big movie, I felt like, because then it was on magazines. I would go to the grocery store and just, my parents are checking out and I'm just standing there, looking at all these magazines and like, oh, there's that word again. Like, oh, there's murder. And, so it's like, that's the culture we grew up with. And I know this is so relevant to right now because literally when we were doing your pre-interview the day before, we were talking about Michelle Trachtenberg and talking about Harriet the Spy. And what's wild to me, actually, Laura, that I didn't even share with you, in a box that I have of my belongings as a child, I used to have notebooks like you too, where I used to pretend I was Harriet the Spy and would like sit and watch my neighbors and like all the little notes that I had. So can you talk to me about that and truly like what a 24 hours later that we had learning that?
Yes, I truly buried the lead by forgetting to mention that. And I've been thinking about that too. And I didn't want to be insensitive, but yes, Celine and I, the day before when we decided, let's do this interview next week, I told you that how I'm pitching my memoir is I'm
Yeah.
Harriet the Spy, all grown up. If she got a little soft and silly with age, because I have a goofy side. But we talked about that because I saw Harriet the Spy when I was 7 years old. I was almost eight and I became obsessed with writing after that. And I had notebooks that said private on the cover, like Harriet the Spy. And I would write in my notebook, I am a spy, and underline it the way Harriet did. And I would even buy like the special pencil she had that just like looked really cool and you had to like roll them down to get more. I was obsessed with Harriet the Spy. That set me up on a lifetime of becoming a writer, but also that curiosity about people that really just kind of stuck with me, stayed with
Mm-hmm.
me. And so, yeah, it was just wild that we were talking about Harriet the Spy a day before the news about Michelle, and that just broke my heart because she changed my life. She changed so many lives and didn't know it.
Yes.
She was only
Yes.
39. I mean, you think about the cost that comes with being a child actor. So, yes, she
Yes.
shaped all of us. But what about her?
What about her? And I can only hope that with time, once her loved ones and family and community heals, I hope one day we get to really learn about who she was. And that's the beauty of, books and documentaries, because then we get to finally know who these people are. So thank you for
Right.
sharing that. Now, one of the things too that you and I have talked about, when we're navigating in a space like this, because I know you're like me too. We love pop culture. You're like my fellow pop, girly pop, if you will, right?
Yes.
And so immersing ourselves in this world of entertainment and storytelling, when you finally got to the point of getting to Crime Watch, what did that mean to you and how did that all come to be?
So that all came to be because I'd been working in online media for several years at that point. I was 22 when I got out of college and I worked at various jobs, Mike.com, Hello Giggles, Attention, which is attn.com. And I was very lucky because I worked at all those places as they were just getting started and
Wow.
I helped them grow on social media. So at the time, Facebook was definitive for success as like a new website. So
Hmm.
it was all about Facebook performance and following the Facebook algorithm, which was constantly changing. And so I was working at attn.com, which at the time hosted a lot of stories about social justice, about the election coming up in 2016.
Hmm.
And I was involved in writing a lot of stories that went viral on social media. And that was part of why I got my job at Crime Watch, because I had helped build the social media presence of Attention. And again, this was right around the election. So things did not go the way that I wanted in 2016. I did not want Donald Trump to win. I think nobody that I worked with wanted Donald Trump to win. We were all very
Hmm.
sad. And I just kind of said, I'd like a change. And so I applied to work at Crime Watch Daily because I saw the job posting on LinkedIn. And Billy Jensen interviewed me and he had said, look, we have a lot of applicants here from ABC, CBS, et cetera, these big name places. But I looked at you because I saw you worked at Attention and you started at a time when it was small. And right now it's gotten really big on Facebook. So I feel like you were a part of that because it was a small
Yeah.
team. So I very much appreciated that about him, that he gave me a chance when it'd be easy to look at somebody at, say, CBS, ABC and think, oh, they've got a better resume. But he kind of
Hmm.
looked at the context. So I was really happy to fill that role. I took over for a young woman who had a baby who was about my age. And so it was a little bit weird at the time. I was like, okay, I'm 28 and I'm going to be working with Billy, who was in his early 40s, and then another guy in his 40s. So I felt like the odd one out, this
Yeah.
millennial girl with, somewhat cranky old men, or getting there cranky old men. But that's how I got involved in Crime Watch Daily. And, I really loved working there. I loved the structure of Crime Watch Daily because it was owned by Warner Brothers Telepictures, and so I had health care, I had good retirement, I was being paid pretty much double what I made at Attention, and my
Wow.
hours were really good. So I remember being like, "This is my first grown-up job." It feels like, and unfortunately, it was my last because I had a baby right when Crime Watch was canceled, and that was almost 7 years ago, and I haven't gone back to work since.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, whew, yeah, what a legacy. And it's so important to like highlight that you were on the like internet portion of this, so not even like you said directly, in production or producing or anything like that. So with that being said, you also love like going down rabbit holes and researching and getting lost in stories. Talk to me about that.
Yes. So that's just kind of my nature. And I've always been interested about people, number one. And one thing I will say that I learned while I was working for Billy Jensen was that he, I think, did private investigation on the side. And his big theory was that there's a lot more on social media about people than they realize. And
Mm-hmm.
so with very little information, I can go down rabbit holes about people online and I can
Yeah.
find out a lot. Like, let's say your Facebook is really locked down, it's super private, but I can still see your profile.
Hmm.
Well, a lot of people don't know that I can still, in most cases, see what that person likes, like, their like page.
Yeah.
And that can give me a lot of information about somebody. Like, there was somebody whose partner I found just based on that, because what this
Wow.
guy did was I was just, this was just research for a friend. She wanted to
Hmm.
know about this guy. So I went and looked, and his profile on Facebook was very private, but I looked at his likes and I could tell this was a guy who didn't have a huge social media presence because he hadn't really updated in a while. So I
Hmm.
knew anything that he likes on Facebook, for example, that's going to be significant.
Right.
And so I looked at his likes, and there's a few generic things like Taco Bell, etc. But there was a really small painting studio in a really tiny town in Washington, D.C., like one of those smaller neighborhoods. And
Yeah.
I thought, okay, so this must be significant. If this guy likes this random little studio with 70 followers, 70 fans in a neighborhood in Washington, D.C. And then I was able to trace that back to his grandma. And from there, I have that name and I look at her profile. And then I look at her friends and I see, ooh, who's this beautiful young girl that liked a picture of this grandma and her grandson? This pretty
Hmm.
girl who lives in the same. So then from there, I can find that woman's address and see, oh, she lives with him. His name is it. So
Yeah.
again, this is all online research. I'm not somebody that has ever gone and stalked anybody. That's not what I'm talking about here. This is about
Yeah.
research, because the only time I've ever done this has been when family and friends have said, hey, I want you to go investigate this person because I think they might be up to something. We might have some grifters on our hands. And so
Mm.
that's how I can find that information. But it's just looking at little clues like that.
Oh,
Um,
I can, yeah, I agree.
I know, and I've talked to my friends and their husbands about it. And once one of their husbands said, "Oh my God, are you going to go like do internet stalking on me?" And I said, "Well, no, Jay. I have to have a compelling reason to go do deep dive in research on people."
Mm.
But that's the kind of thing that I learned at Crime Watch Daily, that people put a lot more on social media than you realize, or that they realize. And it's not just stuff like, for example, that case with Dee Dee Blanchard, and how when
Yeah.
she was murdered, someone went on Facebook and said, oh, I killed her, XYZ.
Right.
Nothing
Right.
like that. But there's like subtle clues you can find about a person and their identity and their associates
Hmm.
by Facebook likes or some small little nugget on social media. And I get lost in nuggets like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that's why, again, friends have tasked me with doing private investigation for them when they need to.
Yeah. And I think it's important because I know I have not talked about this yet on the podcast. But as a research producer myself, uh, that is my job is to be a researcher. So what most people probably don't know is that I am doing very similar things that actually Laura is doing. And to take that even a step further, okay. When you work on a production and you have a budget and you know resources for you, I can do these deep dives even deeper, if you will. And you are absolutely right. The amount of nuggets I have been able to piece together when it comes to like finding certain people, maybe for an episode, or, however that may be, I can go down some really deep rabbit holes in terms of, connections and okay, like the familial side. Okay, here are friends, here are the like I can't even tell you because that was like my 9 to 5 job. So I'm doing
Yeah.
this stuff for 8 hours a day, where I'm digging into that. So I know exactly what you're saying. And I hope people know that it is used for good. I do
Yes.
not do this outside to look up, family members or friends or
Yeah.
anything like that. But when it comes to research and obtaining all this information, that is technically what my job is to do that. But then you throw in the producing side, so then not only am I looking at these people, but I'm also looking for story. How can we share this story? Do they have a story? All of those little questions. So yeah, so I love learning about that. Now, before I get into like a really heavy conversation with you, I do want to go a little bit back to Billy because, um, you are someone that worked with him for about a year. And one of the things that you and I, kind of grappled with was that there's this really good side to Billy. And I know this is a conversation that I've had with others on this podcast. And, it's difficult because there are a lot of things that he did that were actually really good in the sense of, bringing that awareness to like the internet sleuthing, having, people submit tips, um, creating more of like this online presence that, maybe like the Walsh family, where they had the hotline for like America's Most Wanted and all of that to get answers and justice for people, which is on the similar path that Billy was doing, but it was more internet, social media focused. Now, with that being said, we've got to acknowledge that in the real world, in the reality of true crime, people like this exist where they do a wonderful, great job of being empathetic, supportive, being a friend, and then you learn this other side about them. What was that process like for you once that article came out and you realized this is a reality of Billy Jensen?
Right. So I saw that article in July 2022, something like that. And I had seen mumblings on social media. I mean, the first thing I had noticed was he issued an apology because I followed him on Twitter when I was still on Twitter. And
Mhm.
I thought, what is this about? He wrote something about everyone said I made them uncomfortable at a party because I was hugging
I
and
forgot about that.
people didn't feel comfortable around me. And I thought that sounds unusual. Like that's a very strange story. And again, my
Mhm.
experiences with him, he never, I'll get this off the record, he never bothered me in the way that women are saying. Women have accused him and said he did this and this and this.
Right.
Billy never harassed me in that way. But I saw his apology and I thought, that's a little bit strange. This story, something about this feels odd. And then the article came out, and I had seen your tweets and your posts on social media and a couple other posts about people saying that he had done all these things. And I had so much compassion for you. And I just thought, I listened to your story and I read your story and I read it, and like my heart hurt as I was reading the story about how, you talked about standing there in between these men and feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm toggling between them and I don't feel comfortable, and you froze up. And so I reached out to you to say, look, I have so much compassion for you. I believe you. And I've never had that experience with Billy, but I totally believe that this happened to you. And I'm so sorry. And then I looked more into your work and Killing Theodore, the documentary you're working on. And I just loved your fearlessness on social media. You're such a spitfire. And I love that you're standing up for women who are too scared to share their story. And I know that you went through a lot to share this experience with him and then the other individual involved in that story. And I know that it hasn't been easy for you, and you're a mother now. And I know I'm a mother too. I have two boys, and I can't even imagine the courage that it would take to come forward with a story like that. So I was so proud of you, and I was so proud of the other women who spoke forward, who came forward. Yeah, so that's how I got connected with you. And the more I read, I just felt so sad for everybody involved. And I believe everybody that share their
Yeah.
stories. Just because it did not happen to me does not mean that I'm going to go stand with this individual just because he was a good boss to me. Does not, that's no reason to say I know they would never do that, because you don't know. And the way that I saw it too was, I think he was very good at hiring people he knew that
Mhm.
could do the work and were good people. He was very good at delegating. But also the fact that, okay, I'm a 28-year-old girl working with two men in their 40s. I think we know the power dynamic there is going to be not in my favor, right? And I
Yes.
had replaced a woman who was my age and then had a
Right.
baby. So I kind of think in some ways that that is something that goes into account when hiring somebody.
Yeah.
Okay, who can we hire who's going to, not say no to any task at hand? Like, I
Yeah.
don't have the confidence of the 45-year-old peer or whatnot to say no
Hmm.
thanks. And
Hmm.
that was just where I was at before I was a mom. Like, I just felt like, okay, I have to do whatever it takes to keep my job and to not get fired. I'm working in a glamour industry.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very easy to see when somebody might be able to be manipulated into working more than they really want to. And there were times where I kind of blew up and I was probably very unfair. I was pregnant at the time, so I could be a little bit harsh.
Mm.
Towards the end, I just had no filter. And being pregnant kind of emboldened me to stand up for myself and say, look, I feel a little overworked. I feel a little underappreciated.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my, you know, that was my response to your story. I just really felt for you and I believed you. I believe everybody that came forward. And um, it was very sad to see. In my case, I was working. I was working at Crime Watch the last few months in 2018, summer, spring, and that was when the Golden State Killer was
Yeah.
arrested.
Yes.
And we all know Michelle McNamara wrote a book about the Golden State Killer. She passed away before she could finish it. Billy Jensen and Paul Haynes, and I'm not sure if there was anyone else, but I know that they very prominently finished her book. And
Hmm.
as soon as she died, I mean, Billy kind of went on this big tour
Hmm.
promoting the book. And look, like we all know, like Billy is very tall. He's a
Yeah.
handsome individual. He knows it. I mean, he works out a lot. He's handsome. He's tall. He's got brown hair, and he kind of just encompassed this role of like, oh, I'm like the handsome true crime solver. I saw him once with a shirt that just said henchman on it. He had toys. He was this very big character, this almost like Shakespearean character in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he kind of swooped in, like, I'll take over her story.
Hmm.
I remember at the time feeling like this just doesn't feel right in a way. This is so sad. Like this woman was working on a story. She died. She left behind her husband and her little girl. And then you get to catapult to fame for that. And I know he was helping her story move forward, but that always just felt really ugly to me,
Yeah.
especially because I was about to have a child and I was thinking, my God, if I died and left my child behind, that would be just the most horrible thing. It shouldn't be an opportunity for
Yeah.
anybody to get ahead.
Right. You're so right. Um, First, I just want to say thank you for everything that you just said and shared. And yeah, I'm almost at a loss for words, just strictly because yeah, I don't think people really realize how hard that was. And just the fact that, you took the time to read and to get to know what my story was, and then you taking that step further and reaching out to me. And Laura, like during that time, I felt like I had no one in my corner. So, just thank you for saying that. Because I know like how critical people are of like the situation. Um, and I know a lot of people act like it was nothing, but it was something a lot deeper than, probably people even understand and realize. But so I appreciate you saying that and appreciate you standing up with the other survivors. Um, because like I said, it very much felt so lonely and was truly one of the hardest summers of my life. So, but with that being said, to piggyback off of your observations of Billy and especially post Michelle's passing, because that's really when Billy was brought to the forefront for me. I was listening to My Favorite Murder at the time. I believe not too long after the Golden State Killer was captured. I believe that's when maybe a couple months or a few months after that is when I started speaking with Paul Holes, but I didn't really know Billy, and I didn't really get to know Billy until January of 2019. I'm right there with you about Michelle's book. You know, Learning more about Michelle from Bill Thomas, The things that I learned from I'll Be Gone in the Dark, the documentary, and while I don't know Patton, while I don't know, Michelle, or I didn't know Michelle, it's still really disturbing to see this eruption of this new person who just comes in and is whatever. Like you said, like he knows he can be suave. He knows he can be a smooth talker and ran with that. Truly ran with that. And that's where he started creating enemies and even down to true crime consumers, even boiling down to that. And once his book came out and he was like promoting it in every single like MFM Facebook group, and people were just like, what the hell? What the hell, dude? Like enough is enough. And so, I felt like he was being shoved down so many people's throats after a while. But then I meet him, right? And then I start this whole like I don't even want to say like fantasy friendship, but somewhat. Here is a guy who is standing with me when we're talking about Bundy's victims, and we're talking about how Bundy is this glorified killer in America. And wow, he's singing the same tune as me. Great. Oh, he's amplifying my work. Amazing. Right?
Hmm.
And so it
Right.
creates this beast inside of you, and a beast that I just barely started unleashing. And a part of that was sharing my personal tales, like I shared with you before we started recording. Like I give zero fucks about Billy Jensen today, and I will say what I feel about him because it is my right. It is also your right to have your perceptions and to have, your experiences with him. And I think you're right about the power dynamics in the position that you were in, because that is an often situation that happens in Hollywood where it's these power dynamics. You you have to like succumb to them, right? Like eventually you just have to suck it up if you want to do your job. And then because this situation with Billy was more on a personal level, now what, right? And so I think it's just so important to really reflect on both of our experiences with him because it brought us together, and that is the best gift that honestly happened because you are such a good friend of mine, and we have built this friendship over the last, it's going to be 3 years in,
Three.
a few months. We are about to be united, hopefully as neighbors, in the Pacific Northwest here very soon. So, it goes to show that even though a lot of bad had to come from it, so much good has been brought into my life because of it. And you are a massive part of that. So, again, I just want to say thank you for being such a supporter, always listening and believing survivors and doing what's right and taking that a step further and reaching out and look at where we are today. So, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I know that's not easy. So,
Well, thank you. And I mean, this wouldn't have happened if I hadn't seen your story and your tweets.
yeah,
And I know how scary it is because I know that
yeah.
you and the others who shared their stories were up against a lot of threats on social media, a lot of doubting,
Hmm.
and it got really ugly. I
Hmm.
I remember having to take a step back because I kept seeing posts about it on Reddit and Twitter,
Hmm.
and and it's just so weird when you think I spent so much time with this person for a year and a half. Like I was getting emails from him at all hours of the night, work emails, but I remember thinking, okay, when does this guy sleep? And I remember
Wow.
sometimes I would get an email at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 5 a.m., and it was a string like that. Like he would be sending us stories to post. And I would say, "Are you sleeping, Billy? Because I'm getting
Wow.
emails at all." And it's not like my phone is dinging, but I check in the morning and I see that he sent emails all night. And he said, "I get news notifications and I just pass it on to you and our associate at the time, the other individual I was working with." And
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, "But still, are you sleeping?" So I mean, I know that we're all kind of haunted in a way. Anybody
Yeah.
who is interested in true crime, we're haunted by stories. I think he was haunted. And
Yes.
I mean, we all have our demons. And
Yep.
I think that he was sending emails at all hours, and I thought maybe he's not sleeping. And a lot of us who've met Billy, he could be a little cranky. I can be cranky, but he
Mm-hmm.
kind of has more of that, cranky old man vibe of
Mm-hmm.
bah humbug. And I
Mm-hmm.
have I have older brothers who were born in the 70s too. It's kind of this Gen X grit to it, but I just
Oh, I'm
remember
aware I've
thinking,
got Gen X siblings.
yeah, I've got brothers who are, pushing 50. They'll be mad when they hear me say that,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the
Mm-hmm.
reality. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm kind of used to being around, older men in general. Like
Yeah.
I have two older brothers. And so I thought, okay, maybe I'll treat this like they're my older brothers. But it was more like those two kind of had their thing going. And then I'm just this silly little redheaded girl who's always cracking jokes and saying awkward things. I remember at one point, I think one of them jokingly said, "I think you're autistic, Laura." And this was before I knew. And I wasn't
Whoa.
offended. I was just like,
Yeah.
I mean, it was someone there, and I was just like, aha, very funny. But he didn't mean it. Whoever it was male. It was
Yeah.
not Billy. But
Yeah.
whoever said it, they weren't trying to hurt my feelings. They just said, like, you're so obsessive with posting about stories, and you've just got this personality that
Yeah.
you seem like you don't fully get the social surroundings. And so again, I
Mm.
wasn't offended. It wasn't like
Yeah.
I was hurt by that. I mean, I have a nephew who's autistic. And so that was before I was going to have two autistic boys and find out I'm
Right.
autistic. By the way, my
Right.
sister was just diagnosed with autism. So
Oh my gosh. Wow.
yeah, so we're kind of, that's why I have a lot that I've been writing about in this regard. But yeah, that was kind of my experience. So in the year and a half working closely with this person, nothing ever happened. Like, he never harassed me in that way. I never felt like he was being creepy or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes he'd make fun of me for being a redhead, but I would
Mm.
just say, Billy, you're just as pale as I am. So, and then he would laugh.
Well, I would love to because that's hilarious.
I just remember, yeah, he had this thing where he didn't like redheads. Like, I remember in his book, even he mentions there's a guy who's accused of murder who did murder somebody, and he said it's the ginger. And the way he wrote it, I'm like, come on, Billy. Like, we're not
Uh,
all like evil with no souls.
Truly. Yeah, my dad's a redhead. Like, no. So I'm absolutely gonna get more into the autism stuff here in a minute, but you said something that I do want to go back to because you are absolutely right when we're talking about certain cases that haunt us and certain cases that we can't shake. And this is, as I've shared in my personal tales, those ones, but obviously there are also those cases that people don't necessarily really know or very familiar with because it isn't like a big headline name. And one of the cases that you shared with me um, is Ashley Brown's, a nurse in Nashville. Can you talk to me about that case?
Yes, absolutely. So while I was working at Crime Watch Daily, I was reading through dozens of crime stories every day, and a lot of them are very similar. There's a lot of stories about, children being left in hot cars,
Yes.
or like, sadly, like a shaken baby or something. Like they all kind of follow the same pattern. They're all very sad. But one story that really, really unsettled me that remains unsolved is the story of Ashley Brown. She was a nurse in Nashville. She went out with her friends one night. It was 2016, I believe, maybe 2017. And she was found in a landfill.
Mm,
And we still have no idea what happened. But
mm,
after going out with her friends, that's what happened. And I just remember her sister was interviewed, and I'll never forget what her sister said. She said, "Somebody just threw my sister in the trash."
mm.
And that line just still makes me so sad. Like you and I have talked about this in the pre-interview, and somebody did that to Ashley and then just went about their day, and she meant a lot to so many people. But how do you do that to anybody? Why did somebody do that to this nurse, this young woman? Why did she deserve? Someone just threw her away. And
Mhm.
so that is one that I am hoping gets solved at some point. Not that it'll bring her back, but I just think, no, you don't get to do that to her.
Yeah.
And no, and that was actually a case that happened right before I started at Crime Watch. But I remember reading about that, thinking, this is so weird. So Sherry Papini, as most people know, she disappears in November 2016 for a few weeks, and there's this big search for her in Shasta, where she's from. And she was like a cute little mom of two little toddlers, blonde. And everyone was like, "Where is this blondie lady?" And she comes back. She's found on the side of a road. She says, oh, these two Hispanic women kidnapped me and they beat me for 3 weeks. Well, as we all know, that was all a lie. And
Mhm.
Sherry had just fabricated that whole story, and she made Hispanic women feel afraid to go out in
Mhm.
pairs. She scared the community for no reason.
Right.
She created this, and also there were kids that were not playing out in their yards because of that. There were parents that said, "Don't go out in your yards, don't play." She created such a fear in the community. Not just like she created racism, but she also made people afraid to go out. And then you find out she eventually confesses, or they get it out of her, that she made that whole story up. She was with an ex-boyfriend for a few weeks and she wasn't going to go get away or be romantic with him or
Mhm.
relax. She was beating herself up. She was mutilating her body in that time to prove that she'd been hurt. And like that story just mystifies me in so many ways. But number
Yeah.
one, it's like if you're a tired mom, just ask for a vacation. It's not that hard. Or if I were to run away, I joked with my husband, I wouldn't be beating myself up. I'd be at the spa. And he says, yeah, if you ever try to pull like a Sherry Papini, I'll just go look at the local Chipotle and you're there, you know?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. You're you hit it on the nail. Like all of these situations that came from just this one case is bananas and it's bonkers. And you're right. Like it created this whole new terror in the community, even in the state, right? Because you think about California and like the string of crimes that have been committed like along the coast, right? Like you have the Golden State Killer, you have Richard Ramirez, all of those like very prolific cases. And so when you see something like this and it's a blonde, young woman, and all of that creates this hoopla. And you're absolutely right. I I can totally see why that would stick with you and like why that hasn't, fully gone away because yeah, I feel like there's still so many more questions unanswered. And I watched the Netflix doc, and was hoping like I definitely got a stronger grasp of, the chain of events and everything like that. But yeah, like who knows, really down to what she was thinking. But yeah, it's wild. And I just want to say, in regard to Ashley's case, I'm going to put up the information. So anybody who's listening who might be in Nashville or Tennessee or in surrounding states or wherever you may be, I'm going to put that information up. So and figure out who you need to contact with those tips. But it is very important that we still highlight cases like this who, aren't getting that media attention. So thank you for bringing that awareness to Ashley's case.
Yeah. I mean, again, I saw so many stories while working at Crime Watch, and that one just really that just made me so sad because many of us can agree nurses are really nice people. And it's not just because
Mhm.
of that, but nurses are seen as being these nice, kind, like they're like the
Mhm.
doctors without all the vanity of the title doctor. And
Mhm.
she just seemed like she was going out with her friends and somebody threw her away.
Yeah.
And I can't get over that. I
Yeah.
cannot get over that. And I think so. I really hope that her family gets some justice because I'll never forget that image of her sister crying about someone just
Mhm.
threw my sister in the trash.
Yeah.
And yeah, on the opposite end, you have someone like Sherry Papini who vanity is her whole thing. And
Yeah.
she was obsessed with looking beautiful, and then she goes and kind of mutilates her body to prove somebody hurt her. And she didn't just lie about she wasted resources,
Yeah.
and she created so much fear, like you said, around the state. Like, oh, is there like a sex trafficking
Yeah.
thing going on? I mean,
Oh,
we
I
know there
remember
is.
that. Yes, I
And
remember.
like people were like, are they looking for moms now, or did they think she
Yeah.
was 16 and punish her for not being 16?
That's
And
right.
I remember too that we covered that at Crime Watch, and I remember Billy went in and did some interviews with people, and even he was like, I don't know what happened. This is before
Mhm.
we found out it was all a lie. I think even
Mhm.
she even fooled her story, even fooled him because she was just so
Mhm.
convincing and saying, I only want to talk around Keith, my husband. And
Mhm.
so why did I just think, why do you have to do that? Like, just is it really like she was so upset in her marriage, it sounded like that she did all of this, but she ruined her family because now she's out of jail.
Mm-hmm.
she's got a new boyfriend,
Mm-hmm.
and her husband and the kids have moved on without her. But is it, you just gave up your kids and your family. And there was footage in that documentary of when she was choking once on some food. She was at home with her kids, and
Oh,
her little
yes.
boy just like melts down crying because he's
That's right.
traumatized.
I forgot about that part. Oh my gosh.
Like,
Yeah.
she look what she did to him. She did
Yeah.
that to her little boy. So she's
Yeah.
choking and he starts crying like, "Oh my God, mommy, please be okay."
It's disturbing. I mean, and then you had Gone Girl to, to amplify it even more. Um, but like it's wild. It's seriously like one of the most mind-boggling cases I've ever heard of or read about. So yeah, 100%. So before I segue into talking more about your memoir, I would love for you to share your advice with anybody who's looking to break into true crime, work into true crime. What is your advice, especially in terms of like ethics and understanding what this work actually entails?
Sure. Well, one thing I love about your podcast and your work is that you have been all about the survivors and
Mm,
the victims and trying to tell their stories from their perspective, and
yeah.
not in a way that's exploitative. And I know, like, even just with your interview with me beforehand, we had a pre-interview. You talked about what we were going to be talked about before we even hit record. You made it clear, like, here are the subjects we're going to discuss. There's no gotcha moments.
Yeah.
And I know that that's how you want to operate with survivors,
Yeah.
and and talking about victims. And so
Yeah.
I think making it very clear that their story is the most important thing, like the interviewer is not the center of the story, as we've seen so many
Mm,
things in the past
hmm.
as happened. It's all about the survivors, and it's all about the victims in the cases where they don't come back.
Yeah.
And safety is important because I know from working at it was called True Crime Daily later, but when I worked there, it was Crime
Yeah.
Watch Daily. There were times where we would do a story where people would get angry, like those who were
Mm,
spoken of as having committed a crime, or even their friends. So, as the manager of the social media pages, I was the first person who would see messages from people. There was this one time I remember somebody sent in a threat. They said, "I'm going to off the whole staff." And they said something
oh,
like that, they said something like Chris would be the first to go, Chris Hansen. And so I
gosh.
was like, "Oh my God, oh my God, I'm pregnant at that time. I'm scared." And
Mm,
my coworker said, "Relax, send it to corporate. Okay, we'll handle it. It's just some kid that doesn't understand consequences." Because it was a teenager, like
mm,
at the time, just like shooting off threats. But I remember being really scared, like at that point, like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, are we all going to be hurt because we told this story? And that's
Right.
just safety for the people telling the story. But the number one thing is safety for the people who come forward and tell stories. If their identities are at risk, please protect their identities, mask their voices if they need, and don't show their faces.
Mm,
Don't show them in a shadow if they're afraid. Do whatever you need to do to protect them,
yep.
because otherwise this story doesn't get told, and otherwise you are part of them being victimized again.
Hmm. Well, thank you for your kind words. And funny enough, everything that you just said rings true. It is so true in my world. It is so true in terms of what I'm trying to do in this industry. For the first time, as people will hear by the time this episode comes out, uh, I don't stand behind one of the projects I produced, and seeing the end result was unreal because I was led to believe that they were on the path of what I had been screaming and shouting for almost 6.5 months with this production company. And it's, they basically did the opposite of everything that you just said. And and it's hard, and it's a hard pill to swallow. It is definitely taking a lot more emotional and mental toll on me, let alone for the survivors, and they come first. And you know this is why this is important to hear from people like yourself, and myself, who had different roles in storytelling and true crime. And which is why I ask this question to every professional that I have on the podcast, because it is important to remember that you can have ethics, you can have standards, you can be in control of what you have control over, right? And it's hard to do these jobs because you know what the focus is. You know what you want to achieve, whether that be a cold case, a missing person, justice, for victims or survivors, whomever it may be. But when we start putting it into this entertainment format and looking for numbers and, viral sensations, and you lose sight. That's all I'm going to say. You really lose sight of that. So thank you for your, like I said, just your honesty. You are so right. Let's buy a billboard, put it on. You know what I mean? Like that's how loud we need to get about this industry. So thank you for that. So before we get into the fun questions, I want to go back to your memoir because just as you shared, you have been recently diagnosed with autism, now with your sister. I was 34 when I was first diagnosed with ADHD. Autism in my world has very much been prevalent, and you are right. I do have a sibling who is on the spectrum. He is the light of my life. My brother is just the most purest soul, and just I would do anything for him. And so learning your story, learning about your kiddos, um, I just have to take off my hat to you and just
Mhm.
give you so much love and support for doing this because as women, as we know, I always thought something was wrong with my brain. I always, that really became very prevalent in right before I got like months before I got diagnosed with ADHD because I was so tired of it. I was like, I don't understand why I can't focus and I can't sit down and do one thing, but then I've got to do another thing and then I'm doing this and this and this and this and this and there's a million things going on in my brain. And so operating life without medication or educational assistance or it all makes sense. And then you throw in PTSD and everything else like that. So navigating a world where we don't understand what's going on is so scary. And so when you first told me that you were working on your book, I was like, hell yeah, let's go. First of all. But then once you started breaking down exactly what you are trying to do in your story. So do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. And one thing I want to say is there's a lot of great books out there right now about
Yeah.
women who were late in life diagnosed ADHD and autism. So I'm joining a great crop of women.
Yeah.
So Jennifer Romolini, who wrote Ambition Monster, she was my editor at Hello Giggles, and she was very similar to me in that like she was a bad student in school for a really
Yeah.
long time. I was a pretty bad student, not like failing, but C's, B's.
Yeah.
I was a poor test taker. I didn't even get 1,000 on the SAT. She didn't either. I think we were both in the
Oof.
900s.
I
And
probably was too.
yeah, and
Wouldn't
what we
surprise me.
really would have needed was extra time to focus on certain parts of the test. But Jennifer Romolini was late in life ADHD. She has a child on the spectrum. She writes about that in her book, and so that was really informative for me to see her experience because it kind of mirrored my own in so many ways. And people just thought I was dumb growing up.
Yeah,
Like
same.
my mom and dad were like, "Are you college?" Both my parents had master's degrees, and they were like, "I don't think you're college material." Well, number one, there's nothing wrong with that if you're not. But number
Yeah.
two, it was just that I didn't test well. I didn't do well in the
Mhm.
classroom setting because there's all these kids, there's all these distractions. We're sitting all day. Like children are not made to be sitting all day in the classroom being quiet. So, yeah, that's kind of been an interesting thing for me because both my boys were diagnosed with autism at 3, and when the second one was diagnosed, that was when his doctor said, "Yeah, Laura, I think you should go in because there's a lot of women who have been diagnosed late in life, and I think that you're showing some signs I'm seeing. I can't diagnose you, but I will have my friend
Mhm.
evaluate you." And one thing they do when you're an adult who is evaluated for autism, ADHD, et cetera, they interview your parents if possible, if you're okay with that. My mom is the only one who's alive, so they interviewed with her, and they interviewed my husband, and I did extensive forms, extensive interviews, and they do
Wow.
screen you for trauma because some of the signs of ADHD autism can be similar to what happens when you're traumatized. And I did
Mhm.
have some childhood traumas, like my dad passing away morning of senior prom, and then my mom had a seizure when I was little, a grand mal seizure. She almost passed away. So the clinician did determine, yes, you do have some trauma symptoms, but that's also separate from the autism because I showed signs of autism before all of that. And so it's a pretty rigorous evaluation process. They don't want to just give it to you lightly, like the
Yeah.
diagnosis either way, because I'm very lucky that I don't require resources like a personal service worker or
Yeah.
driver or anything like that. But I did require some paperwork. So let's say
Mhm.
I do want to go back to the workforce someday. Well, she has a write up for me like Laura needs some alone time. Laura needs a quiet space. XYZ. This is what
Wow.
she needs to work properly, and she's going to need lots of breaks. This is what this person is going to need to work at her best capacity. Because when I was younger, working in online media, working even at Crime Watch, I worked in open plan offices, which is just not ideal for anyone, but especially if
Mm-mm.
you're on the spectrum, it's overstimulating. I was lucky at Crime Watch. I had my own cube and we all kind of kept to ourselves. But when I was working at other media companies, like we're all working like sardines at a table. I'm breathing in everybody's food. I'm hearing sneezes. The lighting is
Mm.
above me. I'm hearing the clattering of laptops. Like there's so many distractions. And so it would give me migraines. It would make me cranky. And I would ask to work from home. And at the time they said, no, we're a people first organization wherever I was working. And, if I had had my autism diagnosis, then I could have gotten some permission to work from home. And so
Yeah.
that's really the learning lesson from all of this too is like, what do you want to learn from it? I mean, whether or not I go into a job again, here's what I need to know about myself to work optimally. And
Hmm.
there are some individuals, like perhaps your brother, who require more resources. Well, you need
Yep.
that paperwork to prove, okay, this is why I need this kind of work environment. This is
Mm.
why I need this driver. This is why I need a personal service worker. And so, yeah, it has been a whole ride. And I probably never would have found this out without my boys. So I'm
Yeah.
very thankful to my children because I know motherhood can be, I'm sure you've experienced in many ways. Like you lose your identity a little, but for me, it just kind of
Hmm.
clarified, oh, this is who you really are.
Hmm. I love that you are finding empowerment in it because I think that's the other part where sometimes that might feel like a really crippling thing to learn. But now I felt like it was like now you have answers, for everything. And I'm so happy that it has been, this journey for you. And I know it hasn't been easy for you. I know that as fact. And watching you conquer motherhood all while navigating this and still writing and still being this badass. It's so admirable, Laura. Like I've loved watching your journey, especially over 2.5 years, and look at where you're at today. And so when I was thinking about who do I have on this podcast, who do I want to bring on, like you were someone that one day, literally one day, I was just sitting there like do 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 do, and I was like, Laura, I need to talk to Laura. Like literally, like it just dawned on me in the most like random moment. And that's when I was like, hey, so let's have a conversation because you literally have taken so much of your life and have shared it with the world and in a way that is going to make such a difference. And like you said, you're joining this giant group of women who are already talking about autism and what life is like in that capacity, but then you taking it a step further with motherhood, which you're right, you do lose a little bit of your identity of who you are and how you navigate life as a mom. And so I just, like I said, I bow down to all that you are doing. I am so grateful that you're in my life. So again, thank you for just being this rock star and doing the damn thing. So thank you for that. All
Thank
right.
you.
You are most welcome. Now, I want to get into some fun questions. So, what's the most interesting thing you have read, watched, or listened to recently?
Right. So people might hate me for this, but I'm actually not a huge podcast person. I just got into podcasts. I'm like,
It's
10 years too
okay.
late. But one
No.
thing, yeah, I'm very late to the podcast game because I listen to a lot of audiobooks. Like one
Yeah.
part of my autism is that I read books obsessively. Like I read physical books, I read Kindle books, and I listen. But lately I've been really into the telepathy tapes on I mean
Oh.
it's a podcast. It's like one of the most popular ones, I guess. But
Oh. So, tell
yeah.
me more. Tell me more. Like telepathy. Like,
So,
oh,
well, so
wow.
it's well, it's I know, and I'm a little woo woo. I'm from
Same.
California. You are too. Like,
Same.
I believe in ghosts, goblins, all of that, and I love ghosty stories and all that. So,
Mhm.
number one, I'm somebody who's very open to stories of spirituality and
Mhm.
supernatural and all of that.
Mhm.
And so I'm open to that. But I had heard from a friend because she has a son who's autistic as well, but her son is nonverbal. And she had said the telepathy tapes is a must listen for anybody who has a child on the spectrum. So the telepathy tapes theorizes that a lot of nonverbal autistic people might have telepathic powers. And again, this is something they play many, many, many examples of on the podcast. And whether or not you agree, I do think there is something to be said about like if one sense or one aspect of you is maybe like hindered in some way, it might be enhanced in another. Like you hear about blind people maybe having better hearing, or the opposite.
Mhm.
Deaf people
Right.
might have great sight. And so it would make sense if you're not verbal that you're in tune to other you might be in tune to other parts of your environment that others are kind of ignoring. And
Right.
so whether or not again you believe in telepathy, it's a very interesting podcast, I think, about there are these kids who they're nonverbal, but they've learned to type on an iPad, which a lot of autistic individuals use.
Mhm.
And so the mom might be across the room, and she'll think of a number or a word, and it's complicated, and then the kid will type it out. And in the telepathy tapes, they said, "Look, we're in the room. We don't see mirrors anywhere. She's not coaching him." And so
Wow.
there are some people who don't like the telepathy tapes or who think it's controversial, but I just find it really interesting because I have two kids on the spectrum, and
Yeah.
I know a lot of nonverbal autistic people, and I do think there is something to be said about please give these people more respect than you give them. Like they say at the beginning of the podcast, we think nothing's going on in there. That's what a lot of people want to say about someone who's not speaking, but that's not necessarily true at all. Just because they're not saying anything doesn't mean they're not taking in their environment. They're not observing. And I don't know about telepathy, but I don't want to rule it out
Hmm.
because there were so many cases in that podcast where these kids were typing out words, numbers, thoughts that their mom was having across the room.
That is wild. I didn't know it was broken down like that. Uh, I would love to do an off script with you if you want to go like full woo woo and we talk about paranormal because as
Mm,
people have learned in my personal tales, paranormal is a very big part of my life and culture.
same.
Yeah, and right. And we're from California. So, yeah, it's just like standard, I feel like at that point. The amount of, and then being from LA, like how many ghost tours
I know.
are actually done in LA? Which I'm no stranger to. So, let's do it. And yeah, telepathy tapes noted. Now, speaking of Portland, what's your local favorites? Like, do you have any stores, restaurants, coffee shops, bookstores, whatever you like? Shout them out.
Oh, absolutely. So if you come to Portland, I mean, you obviously, but anybody else who comes to Portland, Fat City Cafe has been a family owned, cash only
Ooh,
diner since 1976. They're incredible.
wow.
They make just the best food, and I think they're open till afternoon. But
Mm.
it's on the same strip as Annie Bloom's Books, which is my favorite local bookstore. And
Mm.
even Emily Henry, who's like a very famous romance author, she stopped there and signed a few books in secret because she didn't want to be seen. But
Nice.
like she kind of writes a lot about cute little bookstores and cute little towns. So she stopped at Annie Bloom's, when she came to Portland. And it's on this like really cute strip in Multnomah Village. And a lot of people have said it looks like a Wes Anderson movie or something. It's just this cute. I
Really?
mean, I think it's like Gilmore Girls. Like it's just this
Okay.
adorable little part of Portland. I was there on Monday with my son because he had no school because there's a million days off school. I am
Yeah.
learning.
Oh.
There's so many days off. Oh, professional development day, teacher service
Oh,
day. So we,
yay.
whenever he doesn't have school, we go to Fat City Cafe, and there were a bunch of kids there on Monday, and an old man was saying, "Why are there so many kids?" I said, "Yeah, there's no school. That's why we're here."
Well, I'm pumped because that sounds amazing. Love Wes Anderson, so like now that's a must. Um, I just have to throw out though, Portland's culinary scene is probably one of the best. Like, I don't know if I've only been once to Portland, and
Mhm.
it was in 2020. It was when those horrible tragic fires were happening. So I actually didn't get to see like the city, if you will, because it was all smoke.
Engulfed.
Um, but like I tried Papa Hayden's and I was like, what the sandwich? Like I could rattle off so
Mhm.
many, but I just wanted to say like Portland is very underrated in terms of food. So
Yes.
I'm pumped to try this. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
Now, who is a hero of yours and why?
Oh my gosh, I have so many heroes, but I mean, I'm thinking of a lot of authors, and it's probably people who the true crime community doesn't really think about because I have so many authors that I love.
Hmm.
But I think they're going to like this one actually. I really love this author, Rachel Yoder. She wrote a book called Night Bitch. You've probably heard of it.
Hmm.
And it was made into a movie by Amy Adams. Some people thought the movie was too weird. I didn't think it went weird enough compared to the book. But I really liked Night Bitch because I read it in 2021 and I had just moved to Portland. I had a toddler. I was like in the throes of hard motherhood. I had a toddler and a baby. I was tired. I wasn't getting any sleep. I wanted to write, but I just didn't have the energy. And Night Bitch is a novel about a woman who used to be an artist and now she's a stay at home mom. And she just kind of loses herself in motherhood and she starts becoming a dog at night. And it's kind of a metaphor for losing yourself in
Yeah.
motherhood, for aging, for menopause. But I really loved that book. And I feel like it kind of set me on a path again of like, okay, you can do this. You can write, you can be a writer, because what she ended up doing in the book is she just kind of runs with it, like literally, okay, I'm going to be a dog for a while. And she's silly and she's fearless. And then eventually she gets back to her art. And I thought, I will too. So I really admire Rachel Yoder for telling that story because I think it was so relatable to a lot of us moms who thought, well, what do we do now? We have kids. Are we ever going to be interesting again?
Hmm.
So I really admire her.
Oh, I like that answer. Well, Laura, this has been such an enlightening conversation with some hard stuff, but we got through it. And like I said, I would love to keep having you on,
Mhm.
because you are so interesting and you are so fabulous and you are more than just mom at the end of the day. So I hope you know
Me
that and I
too.
hope you remember that. And I cannot wait for your book to come out the day that it does. And truly, thank you for everything that you're doing and trying to make this world a better place. So thank
You, thank you too. And again, it wouldn't have happened if you
you.
hadn't put yourself out there. So
Thank you.
If you have any information related to Ashley Brown's case, please contact the Metro Nashville Police Department's Cold Case Unit at 615-862-7329. Again, that's 615-862-7329. Be sure to join me next week when I sit down with Zachary Mallory, a survivor of domestic gun violence, sexual violence, and conversion therapy. Zachary uses their story to drive change in public policy and support other survivors across the country. They are the founder and executive director of the Rise Above Justice movement, a powerful platform on Instagram where Zachary and fellow survivors raise awareness about the injustices so many continue to face. His advocacy work has earned national recognition, including awards like the Spirit of Matthew, the Halo Effect, and the Empower Award. It's a powerful conversation about resilience, justice, and the fight to create a world where every voice matters. Don't miss it. This is True Crime in Hollywood, A Personal Tale, a La Activista production with music by Mickey O'Brien. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a review for the show. Thank you for listening. And as always, remember the victims and embrace the survivors.